back to the Miraculous Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Joy, and we believe in empowering people through storytelling and education. Today, we're going to talk about something that we've never talked about before, and that is diabetes. November is Diabetes Awareness Month, and we have one of our mom listeners who's going to come on and share her journey and struggle and information with us when her daughter got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. We have on Megan Husted today, and I'm super excited for her just to educate us. I know that I didn't really know much about it, and so I'm really happy that she reached out to me and then was able to come on to the podcast to speak about this topic. Before we dive into the interview, if you are listening, make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast so you can stay up to date on everything, and that you're following us on Instagram and a part of our Miraculous Mamas Facebook group. We just love connecting over there. So make sure that you are a part of it. All right, we are going to go ahead and just dive right into this interview. All right, everyone, I'm here with Megan Husted, and November is Diabetic Awareness Month. So she is coming on to share her story. We've never really talked about diabetes on the episode or on the podcast before, so I'm super excited to talk with her because it's not only something that adults deal with, but it's something that children deal with as well. And when your child deals with it, then your whole family does. And she's going to share her story of having a daughter with type 1 diabetes. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn because I honestly don't really know that much about it at all. So I'm excited for you to share your story and just to learn from you today.
Yeah, so we're very new into this process. My daughter, Campbell, who will be 13 in a couple of weeks, was diagnosed over spring break of this past year, so March 16th. So we are just 6 months into our diagnosis. So I am by no means an expert, and my husband and I are making a lot of mistakes and we're learning a lot. And so I'm very excited to be able to share and to spread awareness because, it's not something that a lot of people know about, or it's not something that's talked about a lot. I have a little previous experience with it, mostly because I'm an elementary teacher. And so I've had a couple of students with type 1. But it's very different when you're experiencing it yourself, when it's your own child, and when you're living it every day.
Yeah, I can imagine. Can you tell us what type 1 diabetes is?
Absolutely. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. It is not something that Campbell was born with. It is not something that she got by eating too much sugar or by doing the wrong things. Basically, her body started attacking its own pancreas, and they still don't know exactly why. They still don't have this, hey, this is the reason why she has diabetes, and sorry about that. There's no rhyme or reason for who it chooses and why it chooses. It occurs suddenly. There is currently no cure for diabetes. Insulin is not a cure. Insulin is what sustains her life and keeps her alive, but it's not a cure. It's life-threatening. She must have insulin in order to survive. She must have insulin in order every time she eats. And currently, the latest research that I've read, it says that approximately 40 kids per day are diagnosed and develop it in the United States.
Oh, wow.
It can be diagnosed at any time, but they do see a lot of it in children and adolescents. Typically, some of like the older numbers, 20s, 30s, 40s, as you get up, type 2 is going to be more prevalent. But they still find that you get a diagnosis, even 20s, 30s, 40s,
Mm-hmm.
But so basically that's it. Her body started attacking its pancreas. Pancreas makes insulin. And if your pancreas isn't making insulin, then you can't survive. And so we do what we call MDI, which is multiple daily injections. And so essentially anytime that Campbell eats, she has to counteract that with insulin. Each diabetic has kind of a unique carb ratio to follow. And that kind of tells us how many units of insulin we give her per meal. And sometimes it works beautifully, and other times, through no fault of anybody's, it doesn't. And so you're just doing the best that you can. She sees an endocrinologist, and at our very first visit last year, he said to me, Mom, you are never going to be as good as a working pancreas. Like there's no substitute for a working pancreas. And sometimes you are going to do everything right, and you are going to do everything the way that you're supposed to, and it's still not going to work. And you can't get down on yourself for that. And that's what my husband and I really have to think about on the hard days and on the days that we're questioning, things. We just have to remind ourselves that Campbell's body is failing her. This organ that is supposed to work and do this job is not. And we're going to try our best to substitute for that, but there's nothing as good as a working pancreas.
So I feel like while you were talking, I learned so much already. So first of all, I did not know that it's like an autoimmune disease.
Yes.
Honestly, I knew nothing really about it. Like I said at the beginning, that it's an autoimmune disease, and I did not know that it was life-threatening.
Yes.
I think probably because we all probably know people with diabetes and they don't seem like they're dying or anything like that. So it doesn't seem like a life-threatening disease.
Right. And they do call diabetes the invisible disease because by looking at Campbell, you would not know that she was diabetic, and you would not know that every day is a fight for her life, because it's not something that you can just see outwardly, And so that's one of those things too. And she's at a hard age too right now. But after we were in the hospital after her diagnosis and we came back to school, and she got to share with, her friends and things. And there were classmates that said, you don't look sick. You look fine. And she's like, well, I mean, I am fine, but if I don't take my shots, if I don't take my insulin when I eat, then I'm not fine. Then I could die. Well, you don't look sick. And it's true. I mean, outwardly, you would look at a diabetic and you wouldn't necessarily know. And, there's a difference too. I mean, there's type 1, there's type 2. Then obviously there's also like gestational diabetes, which, you get just during pregnancy. But I mean, that's where there's a lot of difference too, because I mean, a lot of people, who maybe have, diabetes, like type 2 diabetes, you don't necessarily, depending on the severity, you may not necessarily have to have insulin if you're a type 2 diabetic. In type 2s, the pancreas is still producing insulin. It's just in smaller amounts. Whereas in type 1, your body is attacking your pancreas and shutting it down. So at some point, your pancreas is going to completely stop working. And in type 2, typically it's a gradual development. I mean, depending on the person, whereas type 1 typically occurs more suddenly. There's not necessarily as many signs leading up to it, which is kind of our experience. We were very blindsided. Diabetes was not on our radar. It was not something that we had thought about at all. And so when Campbell was diagnosed, it was a shock. It was a shock.
Well, like you said, I mean, gestational diabetes, which is something I'm more familiar with as a doula,
right.
It's usually just controlled with diet. It's something that you get during pregnancy. You have to control it with diet. There are definitely other things to look out for. They look out for different things, especially near the end when you're going to deliver. Some people are put into a high-risk category, depending on the severity. But most of the time, they don't have to take anything for it. A lot of times it's controlled through diet. So it doesn't seem very serious. Like, I know so many people who have had it and they're like, yeah, I got it during pregnancy. Then as soon as you have the baby, it's gone. So
Exactly. And I had gestational diabetes with my second and my third, not with Campbell, but with my second and third. And I never took any medication. I just, continued to exercise the way I was more cautious about, what I was eating, and did blood work 6 weeks postpartum with both of them. And they're like, yeah, you're good.
Right.
So it was fine. But I mean, with Campbell and with type 1, you have to have insulin to survive. If you don't have insulin, you're not going to make it.
We're going to take a break from this episode so I can share with you one of my favorite new brands to partner with, and that is Dadgrass. And you can go to dadgrass.com/mamas to get 20% off your first order. But let me tell you a little bit about them. Dadgrass is legal, organic, smokable hemp that relaxes your body and mellows your mind. Their 100% organic pre-rolled joints are very low in THC and high in CBD, so you can enjoy the effects of CBD while keeping a clear head. You can chill out without getting stoned, and it's like having a glass of wine, but not the whole bottle. All Dadgrass products are federally legal for ages 21 and over, and it ships right to your door anywhere in the U.S. So whether you're looking for a way to chill and enjoy your favorite shows at the end of the day, Dadgrass will leave you in a euphoric mood. Since I am pregnant, I have not tried it yet, but Vito has, and he's actually really enjoyed it. He's never really been big on CBD or THC, either one. And then we received the product and he's like, you know what, I'm going to try it out. And he's really enjoyed it. It's helped him kind of relax at the end of the day and just kind of mellow out before going to bed. And it's not just for dads, guys. It's for moms too. They have mom grass as well. So make sure that you check them out. And Dadgrass is offering our listeners 20% off your first order when you go to dadgrass.com/mamas. Go to dadgrass.com/mamas for 20% off your first order. That's dadgrass.com/mamas. So what were your signs then with her that made you guys start to see what was going on with her body?
Well, so Campbell turned 12 last fall. She started middle school. And last fall, we noticed a very gradual decrease in her weight. I mean, she was getting a little bit taller and she was thinning out just a little bit. But we chalked it up to her age. You know, puberty's on the horizon. You're in middle school now. So PE is much more intense. And it wasn't very drastic. And so we chalked it up to puberty. And then we came back after Christmas break and we noticed her eating habits were a little bit different. Suddenly, her portion control was a little bit smaller. She wasn't eating nearly as much. And we again noticed, you know, she's losing a little bit of weight and she's thinning out, especially in her, you know, her face, things like that. And then in February, she got the flu and it wiped out the whole family. My husband, my two other children, Campbell, all except me. That's the benefit of a teacher's immune system. You're usually pretty hardy, yeah. But she was just having a really terrible time bouncing back. And she was pale and kind of greenish in color. And she basically was not eating at all. Or she would eat. And there were several instances where after she would eat, she would go to the bathroom and she would vomit. And I started questioning whether she had an eating disorder. I've had some family members who have had eating disorders. So it's always something that I'm aware of and something that's kind of on my radar. And I said to my husband, do you think that she has an eating disorder? And he said, I don't know. But the fact that she was not eating and then she was throwing up after meals had us concerned. And so I contacted our family PA and set up an appointment for a couple weeks later over spring break. And I just kind of gave her the heads up, told her, you know, what I was seeing, told her that Campbell had lost, you know, what I was seeing now was a significant amount of weight. It had started gradually, but I was starting to become concerned. Mm-hmm. And PA was like, not a problem. You know, we'll bring her in. We'll do some blood work. We'll talk about, you know, just some healthy choices. And, you know, maybe she just needs like a good nutrition program. She gave me the name of some counselors, you know, and the teenage years are hard years, you know? And so we kind of set that about as our plan. And we live about 2 hours from my parents. And so I loaded up the kids and we went up to my mom and dad's to spend spring break. And it was there that I felt in my gut that something wasn't right. She was hanging out in her bedroom at my parents' house, wasn't interacting with her cousins, wasn't playing with them. My dad had bought a bounce house over spring break and all the kids were out bouncing. She was not. She was just very much to herself in her own room. And, you know, my husband and I were both like, Campbell, if you would eat, you would feel better. We think the reason you feel bad is because you're not eating. You know, if you would eat, you'd feel better. And she'd eat a little bit and then she would cry and she would say that her stomach hurt and she would say she couldn't eat anymore. And it was a couple of days before her scheduled appointment that I called my husband and I said, something is not right. Mm-hmm. I said, she is not eating and she does not look good. I said, I'm loading everybody up and I'm coming home and I'm taking her to the emergency room. And he was like, okay. And so, I mean, and we were both kind of hard on her. You know, you would feel better if you ate. If you ate, maybe this, you know, wouldn't be happening. And she cried. She didn't want to leave my parents. Give me another day. I promise to eat. I promise that I'll feel better tomorrow. But I just felt like it wasn't okay. So we loaded up and we weren't on the road very long. And she said, well, can we stop and get something to eat? I'm hungry. And, you know, my mom frustration, Campbell.
Yeah.
You just were not eating. You weren't eating at Grandma and Grandpa's. And now we're on the road going home to the doctor. And now you want to eat. Like, are you really sick or what is going on? You know, and I don't know. I just don't know. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take her to the emergency room. And basically all I have to go off of is she's not acting right. Her coloring is off. And I feel in my gut that something is wrong. And they're going to laugh in my face and, you know, tell me that I'm crazy. But I said, I just don't feel right. So we took her and they did, you know, took her blood pressure and did some blood work. When they did her blood pressure kept dropping. Like they would lay her on the table and take her blood pressure and then they'd sit her up to do it and it would drop. And then she'd be sitting down and they'd have her stand up and it would drop. And they did a urine sample and she came back and she said, Mom, I think maybe I have like a UTI. She said, because my urine looked bad. She said it was a yucky color and it didn't look very good. And I said, well, that could be it. And then the doctor came in and asked questions. And a couple of the major red flags for diabetes is increased thirst and increased urination. Because if your body is not flushing out those sugars, you know, then you're going to be thirsty all the time. And because you're drinking and drinking and drinking, you're then going to need to urinate to get rid of that. And so two of the big signs of diabetes are frequent urination and excessive drinking, which the doctor asked about. And I said, no. And I said, we left my mom and dad's like at noon and it's 4:45. She has yet to use the bathroom. I mean, until you made her to, you know, to pee in the cup. And he's like, okay, well, you know, just checking. And they hooked her up to an IV, which was dramatic and painful for her. And we sat for, you know, probably an hour or so. My husband was at home with our two younger ones. And when the doctor came back in and he had his clipboard, he closed the door and then he sat down in his stool and he scooted it up in between us. And he looked at me and I told my husband it was in that moment that I knew that something big was about to go down. Like I knew. And he said, we got her lab work back and he said, her glucose numbers are extremely high. Mm-hmm. He said her glucose numbers are very elevated. And he said, I feel very confident in diagnosing her with type 1 diabetes. And all I could see in my peripheral vision was the trash can and thinking, I am about to lose my lunch and everything that I have eaten. Like, because I mean, it's just a huge blow. It's just a huge kick in the gut because I thought I knew what that meant. Mm-hmm. I mean, I look over at this 12-year-old girl who's got tears running down her face, and she has no idea what that means. Mm-hmm. She has no idea how drastically her life has just changed. Mm-hmm. And she reached for my hand and she said, it'll be okay, Mom. It'll be okay. It'll be okay, Mom. And I was rubbing her hand and I'm like, I'm trying to listen to this doctor tell me all of these things, but I'm by myself. I don't have my husband and I have a very scared child who's trying to process what it is that they're telling her. Mm-hmm. And he said, we live in a very small town. And he said, I'm going to be sending you to Wichita. Wichita, Kansas is about 2.5 hours from us, but they have a children's hospital, a children's transport. And he said, we're going to be sending you to Wichita. You're going to be receiving some education, learning your new normal, learning how this is going to work. And I said, I don't remember what I said, but anyway, he basically came back with, oh, she's not stable enough for you to drive. We'll be transporting you by ambulance.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, oh. And I said, do I have time to go home and get a bag? And he goes, how far do you live? I said, oh, about half a mile across town. And he said, yes, you have time to get a bag, because the ambulance was coming from a neighboring town. And so I told Campbell, I said, I need to step outside and call Dad. I said, and it's fine. I said, everything's fine. I said, I just need to fill him in. Okay. And so I stepped outside and he answered. And I said, and he was like hollering at the dog in the background or something. And I'm like, Steve. And he's like, I'm here. And I said, I need your full attention, because what just went down is big. And I said, Campbell and I are headed to Wichita. They have diagnosed her with type 1 diabetes. And my husband, who is my complete opposite, said, okay. I said, okay. I said, Steve, I said, type 1 diabetes. I said, this is huge. And he said, I know that, Megan, but at least now we know what's going on. Like, at least now we have a reason for all of this. And I'm just like, no, you don't understand. Like, this is gonna be life-changing for all of us. We're talking shots. We're talking, my mind is just like a complete blur. And he's like, okay, well, we got this. Mm-hmm. No, we don't have this. This is huge. And so, he packed a bag and brought it up to the hospital, and her and I took an ambulance ride. And thankfully, this was this past March. So he was actually able to join us at the hospital. Only one of us was able to stay, but he was able to be at the hospital from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. Mm-hmm. So at least when we were being educated, he was there so that we could both hear the information, so that we could both practice all of the things. Because my heart goes out to those who were diagnosed during the height of COVID, when only one adult could, be in the hospital, because I can't imagine being there by myself and having to learn it by myself and then trying to go home and teach it to him, So that was a huge blessing. Mm-hmm. But we were in the hospital for about 2.5 days, and they just spent time educating us and teaching us how our lives were going to go and what we were going to have to do in order to keep her safe and keep her healthy and keep her body going.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I feel like I got goosebumps and teared up when you're telling this story. First of all, I cry at everything right now. So I'm I'm in that stage of pregnancy where everything just makes me cry. But it's so hard. You just want the best for your children, right? It's hard for you as a mom, but you're now, like you said, she doesn't understand how her life's going to change. She can't ever just go anywhere with no worries. She has to make sure that she has her medicine. She has to make sure that she has everything that she needs. And her life has changed. Yes.
And I said, why couldn't it have been me? Mm-hmm. A 12-year-old child, nobody deserves this. But, you're talking, this is a terrible age. Preteen girl is hard enough. Life is hard enough the way it is. And then to throw this on her. And, the first night that we got there, and she was hungry. We hadn't eaten since, lunch, and she wanted something to eat. And, okay, but we're going to have to give you a shot to counteract that. We're going to have to give you insulin. And the tears and the screaming and the crying. And I remember after they left and she was eating her supper, the cafeteria was closed. The nurses had gotten her a bowl of delicious cheesy macaroni and cheese, and she was eating that. And she said, well, that wasn't so bad. I don't have to do that again. And I said, oh, I said, honey, every time that you eat, we're going to have to do a shot. And she said, for how long? And I said, for the rest of your life? And the tears but I don't want to. That hurt. That's not fair. I don't want to have to do a shot. And I said, I know. I said, this sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I am so sorry, and so we had to deal with, and we still do sometimes. I'm hungry. Okay, well, what do you want? She says it. Okay, well, that would be X amount of units. Well, if I have to take a shot, then I'm not going to eat it. Yes, you can eat it. You just have to take, no, it's not worth it. It's not worth the shot. And that's heartbreaking,
mm-hmm.
Or I'm hungry, but I don't want to have to take a shot. And it's like, sweetie, most of the time, unless it's something that's very low carb, a piece of cheese or, a little bit of beef jerky, you're going to have to take a shot. And that's another common misconception too is, well, vegetables are healthy. She can have as much as she wants. Well, fruit's healthy. She can have as much as she wants. In a diabetic, you're not looking at sugar. You're looking at carbohydrates. When we are determining how much insulin to inject in Campbell, we are counting the number of carbohydrates a food has. Sugar really doesn't have anything to do with it. So like there's people that'll say, well, we got sugar-free such and such, so she can have it. Well, yeah, she can have it, but she's still going to have to take a shot for it
mm-hmm.
because and unless it's zero carbohydrates, she's going to have to take a shot for it. And
mm-hmm.
so that's a common misconception is, well, if it doesn't have sugar in it, you can have it and have as much as you want. Or, well, fruits and vegetables are good for you, so you can have as much as you want. She can, but she's still going to have to take a shot. Fruit is full of natural sugar and carbohydrates. So
mm-hmm.
that's a big misconception. We count carbs. We don't count sugar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always thought it had to do with sugar too.
Yeah.
So what does a typical day look like for her right now?
Well, so Campbell is in what they call the honeymoon phase of diabetes. And when you are honeymooning, it means that your body is still making some insulin. Her pancreas is still making some insulin, but we have no way of knowing how much it's making. And also there are times right now where it makes more, and then there are times when it makes less. So when her pancreas right now is making a decent amount of insulin, she doesn't have to take near as much. But on the weeks that her pancreas isn't working so well, the insulin is more. She has to have an increased amount of insulin. They tell us that the honeymoon period can last for years. So we may end up riding this roller coaster of blood sugars for years before her pancreas completely shuts down and stops working. And the way that we'll know, they tell us the way that we'll know is when we start having to see an increased usage of insulin consistently.
Yeah.
Then we'll know. So like for right now, the last week, Campbell's pancreas has been working pretty well. So, and she can have whatever she wants in moderation. And that's one thing that they told us when we were in the hospital is, first of all, Campbell's lost so much weight, do not deprive her of anything. And if you deprive a diabetic of something, especially a child, they're just going to sneak it. So let her have what she wants in moderation. Campbell can't have a candy bar every single day. But if she decides one day that she wants a candy bar, give her the shot and let her have it, Mm-hmm. But right now, like this morning, Campbell woke up and her blood sugar, a typical, you and me, typical person, blood sugars run between 90 and 120 most of the time. That's kind of, what, in a perfect world, her blood sugar would be between 90 and 120 all the time. In Campbell's world, that's pretty rare. She woke up this morning and her blood sugar was good at 88. And she decided that she wanted a donut from our grocery store for breakfast. Now, homemade donuts don't come with a nutrition label that has a carb count on it. So when you're new to it, like my husband and I, you're making a guess and doing the best that you can. So I made a guess based on previous things that I thought. I gave her shot before. We call that bolusing when you give the insulin that you need for a meal before the meal. That way the insulin has a chance to absorb into her body and counteract what she's eating. And it helps to prevent a spike in blood sugars. So we bolused and did 2 units of insulin, and I injected that in her arm this morning. And then we got in the vehicle, we headed to the store, got the donut, and then dropped off my son at daycare, and she ate her donut on the way to school. And I have, Campbell has what they call a Dexcom G6, which is a way that I can monitor her blood sugars. It's inserted into her skin, and then it does readings on her blood sugars. So her phone will tell her what her blood sugar is, and then it sends it to my husband and I's phone so that we can see what it is. And I watched it this morning, and it went up just nice and steady. She happens to have PE second hour, which is helpful because then she can kind of burn off some of that. And then she just made a nice downhill trend, and her blood sugar was around 90 before lunch. Most of the time she eats a school lunch, so she called me before lunch to tell me that she was going ahead and giving her injection. Today for lunch was a chicken patty and a hot roll. We're very lucky because our school district, they carb count the meals that they serve the kids, like they have that nutrition information. So we're able to just pull that up on the website and figure that. And then, so she gave herself a shot before lunch, because by the time she goes down in the cafeteria, waits for her lunch, sits down and starts to eat, that's given the insulin chance to move through her body. And then this afternoon, she'll probably have a snack after school. So we'll do a shot again. Tonight for supper, we'll do a shot before she eats. And then she does a different kind of insulin at night. It's called Lantus. And Lantus is a slow acting insulin. The stuff she takes during the day is quick acting, so it can counteract with what she's eating. The Lantus that she does at night kind of helps keep her blood sugar steady throughout the night, so we're not seeing spikes or drops. And so she'll do her Lantus at night. So on a good day, usually only 5 shots: breakfast, lunch, snack, supper, and before bed. On a bad day, we can do up to 8, 9, even 10. Mm-hmm. So it depends. If her blood sugar 2 hours after she eats is not in her assigned range, if it's too high, we have to do what we call a correction, which is to give her more insulin to bring it down into the normal range.
Mm-hmm. Has she gotten used to the shots?
She really does a pretty good job. I mean, I would say 85% of the time, she's pretty compliant. She's pretty agreeable. She does a pretty good job. We all have our bad days. Mm-hmm. And as a teenage girl, she has more bad days because of hormones or other things. So sometimes that's a fight, or especially if she has to do a correction, if her blood sugar we haven't carb counted correctly, or we've carb counted correctly, but her body just isn't doing what it's supposed to do. It's not meshing well with it, and she's too high and she has to do a correction. She usually gets very angry, very irritable, and this isn't fair. My life isn't fair. And we know, honey, and off we go. She does her own shots at school, and even sometimes at home, she'll give them in her abdomen. But then there's times when her stomach is sore and it's bruised from the shots. And so my husband or I will give them in the back of her arm. The fattier the body, the better it is. It usually stings less or burns less. So her stomach and the back of her arms are her favorite place for injections.
Mm-hmm. Is there any big side effects that come with these medicines that you guys have to look out for at all?
With the insulin, we've been really lucky. I mean, her body has accepted both the Novolog, which she takes during the day, and the Lantus at night without any issues. And we've been really lucky. But things that we do have to watch now that we didn't before, if she gets sick, like if she has a cold or if she has allergies or if she has things like that, we have to be careful about what we give her over the counter, because you don't know how that might react to the insulin and to her body and things like that. We have been very lucky She has not needed, knock on wood, any kind of medication since she's been diagnosed. But I know I follow a lot of moms on Instagram or, other people that have type 1, and they'll say that certain over-the-counter medications will cause their blood sugars to spike. And so they have to be mindful of that.
Right. So since it's a disease that kind of deals with the pancreas, and this could be like a very ignorant question. Is there such thing as like a pancreas transplant surgery type thing try to?
They talk to us about like an artificial pancreas and how they, they're doing research constantly about things like that. Campbell at some point will probably have what they call an insulin pump. And a pump would be, like where you would insert, like into your body, and you would use, it looks kind of like a little cell phone, and you would be able to put in the information, and it would be able to put the insulin directly into your body. We know several people who have insulin pumps. Right now, that's not really an option for Campbell because she's in the honeymoon stage and because her pancreas is still putting out insulin, because in those pumps, you have to put a minimum amount of 90 units of insulin, and they only last like 3 days. Campbell does not use anywhere close to 90 units. And so it's not like you can just syringe all of that extra out and move it to the next one. So it would be wasting a lot of insulin. And I have what I consider to be fairly good insurance, but insulin is not cheap.
Right.
And having diabetes is not cheap. And I'm an elementary teacher, and teachers don't make a lot of money. And I have 2 other children. And so I just, in my mom heart, I cannot bear to think about throwing away all of that insulin every 3 days that we are not using. Right. And that may sound very selfish of me, like, if the pump would be better for her, get her the pump, but it would be a lot of wasted money. And so right now, we've been doing okay with MDI, and we've been doing okay with her multiple daily injections. Like I said, some days better than others, but that's just kind of where we're at. And at some point when that poor pancreas decides to completely shut down, then we'll definitely look at a pump for her.
Mm-hmm. Is there, like you said, there's no cure at all for it. Have there been cases where people somehow no longer had type 1 diabetes?
Not that I have read. We had several people, who after she was diagnosed said, well, we won't stop praying because we believe in a greater power. And, if we continue to pray, who knows, God has done miraculous things and has healed many people, and you just never know. And there are some times, like last week, where she needed so little insulin because her pancreas was just working as hard as it could, that I thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing? Wouldn't it be amazing if we went back to see her endocrinologist in a couple of weeks and she was cured? Something miraculous had happened and she was cured. But unfortunately, with type 1, that's not the case. This is it for us. And, I pray for a cure. I pray that someday they'll figure out some way to do something to that dead pancreas inside those bodies that just rejuvenated and make it start working again. And man, if that happens in her lifetime, what a miraculous thing that will be. But until that time, this is our life, and this is our story, and this is what we do. We don't sit down and eat a meal without carb counting. We don't get to go to a restaurant without carb counting. We don't leave the house without an insulin pen and needles and snacks and juice and alcohol wipes and glucagon, which is, what you insert in her nose for an extreme low if she's seizuring or non-responsive. Life as we once knew it 7 months ago is no more. And it's kind of like having a newborn again, because you can't leave the house without 100 different things, even for a small trip or a small getaway. You you have to have everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you found any resources or things that have been super helpful for you guys during this time in your lives?
You know, when we were sitting in the hospital, I had recently joined Instagram. I mean, not that long before. And I started searching. And I have been able to connect with other mothers of type 1s through Instagram, which I have found very helpful. I did connect with a woman. Her name is Katie, and she actually has a podcast called Sugar Mama's Podcast, where she just specifically talks about type 1. Her daughter was diagnosed a year ago in August.
Yeah.
And so I started listening to her podcast to find someone else that I felt like was walking in my shoes and knew what I was going through. And Katie has been a very sweet soul and a kind resource for me. And I've been able to reach out and ask her questions. The first time I went to take my kids to the movie this summer, and I reached out to her and I'm like, any advice? Like, have you taken your kids to the movies and what would you do? And I mean, bless her heart. She said, well, we actually haven't because of COVID, but this is what I would do. And I followed her advice and it went beautifully. And I've reached out to her, you know, a number of times, but I'm one of those people. I don't want to bother somebody. I don't want to be an annoyance or a hindrance. And everybody's diabetic journey is a little bit different than yours, either the age of their child or the gender or just their situation. But then also we had a family move into our community a year ago, and I didn't meet the mother until May. And Rachel, her little boy has type 1. He's 4, but also her husband is a type 1. And I've started forming a new friendship with her, and she has been a wonderful resource as well. And so for me, I feel like I have some people that I've been able to reach out to and to connect with. Unfortunately, you know, we live in central Kansas, and there are other children even in this district that have type 1, but none of them are 13-year-old girls. Mm-hmm. And so I feel sad sometimes. I wish that Campbell if we lived somewhere bigger, that Campbell would have more of a community of kids her own age going through the things that she is going through. And they have done in the past, like JDRF walks, and also like summer camps and things like that, where you can go to camp and there are doctors and nurses that are there on staff 24/7. With COVID, those things haven't been as readily available, but I still keep hoping and praying that we might get to a point here where they are, because I think it would be so good for her to be able to connect with some other girls her age that are going through the same thing, because it's a lot. And there are days that I get so frustrated with her and so frustrated with things. And then I lay in bed at night and I think how brave she is, how courageous she is, and how well she is handling this overall. And they kept telling us in the hospital when they would pull us out and talk to us and give us updates. And they're like, we know that you don't feel like it, but she is handling this so well. We see teenagers and preteens that come in here that are not willing to try it and that are angry, you know, and they are defiant and they're refusing to give shots. And I mean, and it gets ugly fast. And so they said, you know, you should be proud, because she is really handling this so much better than what a lot of kids her age do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I can imagine. I mean, that has to be so hard, adjusting to that normal, and like not even being able to be like after school, like, hey Mom, I'm going to go over to my friend's house and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like just making sure that you have everything. And I can't imagine having to take a shot every single time before I eat. Like, I'm sure there's days where you're like, this is just so annoying.
Days that you just want to break. And that's what some days when I am so frustrated with diabetes and I get mad and I'm upstairs in my shower and I think, Megan, but you get a break at some point. It's not you that's doing the injecting. Mm-hmm. You know, like Campbell doesn't ever get a break. Mm-hmm. She doesn't ever get a break. This is her life. Mm-hmm. And, so then I feel selfish when I'm having those, a bad day, and I'm like, I am so done with diabetes. And I'm like, and she is too, but it affects her even more greatly than it affects me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank God for insulin.
Yes.
And that she's able to have still some normalcy with this disease.
Yeah, absolutely. And we say that all the time, we are so thankful for insulin because without it, we would not have her. And so on the days when it is really, really hard, you have to kind of stop and be grateful for the small things. And so, we can be thankful for insulin. We can be thankful for the CGM, the continuous glucose monitor that she wears on her stomach or on the back of her arms, that can give us peace of mind, where we can check on her constantly and know what her sugars are and not have to always be finger pricking her. That's important too. So sometimes, because it's very easy to look at the bad, and there are days that I do plenty of that, but we can look at the good too.
Right.
And be thankful for that.
Right. Well, I want to thank you, Megan, so much for coming on and for sharing your story, being so open. I learned a lot. I didn't know any of this. And I will link the Sugar Mama podcast in the show notes. If anybody listening has a kid with type 1 diabetes who is looking for a resource, and I'll look and see if I can find any other ones as well. But yeah, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your story.
Also, there's one called the Juice Box podcast as well. So I listen to the Sugar Mamas and then the Juice Box podcast. And both of those have some really good information, especially for those of us who have just newly diagnosed kids and are just stressed as all get out, and we don't know left from right and up to down. It's nice to know that there are other people going through the same thing as you.
Yeah. I'll link that one as well. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm so grateful for her coming on and to share her story and educate us about type 2 diabetes. Like I said, it was just kind of something that I really didn't know anything about. And I know that it's a struggle that a lot of families face and go through. I had no idea that it was like an autoimmune disorder at all. So that was very interesting to find that out. There's a lot of different misconceptions, I feel like, that come with the diabetes conversation. So thank you, Megan, so much for coming on. All right. Make sure that you stay tuned the rest of the month. We have some really great episodes rolling out. Again, always reach out to me. Let me know what topics you want to hear, who you want to have on, and we'll do our best to make that happen. All right. Welcome to November, guys. It's almost the end of the year. I cannot believe it. But it's my favorite time of year. I love the fall, winter season, holidays. Oh, it's the best. All right. Love you. Have a great week. Bye.
If you want to be the most interesting person at the cocktail party, well, hop on over and listen to the Brain Candy podcast.
Our award-winning content will have you laughing while you're learning.
We read all the best articles, books, and studies and keep up with new TV shows, documentaries, and pop culture. And then we cram it all into 2 shows a week.
Conspiracy theories, cannibal rabbits, unsolved mysteries, the history of the Walkman. There's something for everyone.
The Brain Candy podcast. Find our link in the show notes.
Or simply search for the Brain Candy podcast on your podcast app.